that we should definitely start again from the beginning of the chapter, which means we'll do Chazara on about two daf Gemara. And the reason for that is because when dealing with the laws of Tumah Tahara, these are not things that we commonly deal with, and therefore trying to remember all the terms and remember all the principles and the rules can sometimes be difficult. And so to just jump in it without having the principles, refreshed in our memory, then it makes it difficult. So I'd like to start from the beginning of the chapter. However, when I was preparing the class today, I realized that it might even be helpful to go back to Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis just to do the Mishnah on the 18b, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and then we'll jump into the next Mishnah, which is the beginning of our chapter that we're up to. This way, we could have today at least a full discussion on the main principles with regards to Tumah Tahara, because once you have these principles, down pat, then I believe it's easier to have these conversations and just make reference to them later on as we're discussing. So yeah, I think that's what I would like to do. So for those who are just joining, good morning, welcome back. What I propose that we do is, as I mentioned, is we're going to start again from the beginning of the chapter. This way, helping us to refresh our memories with regards to the basic principles. And I want to go as far as to say we should first do the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and then go from that Mishnah and jump into our Mishnah on Daf Chof Amud Beis. And this way, we can have a fuller discussion about the different principles of Tumah Tahara. So it's already after 10 o'clock. I'm going to start, and anybody who joins afterwards is welcome to. I'll tell them where we're up to, and we'll take it from there. So this is Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. We're going to start from the Mishnah, and I'm just going to give a very brief introduction. I hope it remains brief, but we shall see. There was once a Meshulach, and he wanted to make an appointment with a very great philanthropist. And the philanthropist says, how much of my time do you need? He said, I only need 7 minutes, unless you have questions. If you have questions, then I might need some more time. So likewise, I'm going to make a brief introduction, and then we'll move from there. Again, for those who are just joining, we're starting from Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. We're just going to do the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and then we're going to move and jump into our chapter. We're going to go to Daf Chof Amud Beis, and we're going to start again from the beginning of the chapter, although we've done it, but it's really good to do Chazara and to refresh our memories. Okay, so here goes for the introduction. There are, in the Torah, different levels of Tumah, okay? And each one of those levels are treated with a greater sense of susceptibility to contract impurity and to pass on impurity. It's really important to understand the different levels and the principles by how they are governed, okay? So the first thing, which I think everybody knows, even if you know nothing about Tumah Tahara, is that a dead body is the most severe of all the levels of Tumah. It's called Avi Avois HaTumah. There's only one such category, right? It's the father of all fathers of impurity, and that is a corpse, a dead body. Now, after that level of Avi Avois HaTumah, you have what's called an Av Tumah. Now, an Av Tumah is usually we refer to a Zav, a Zava, a Nida, or a Yeledes, and someone, meaning who has had a flow that caused them to become impure. They are called an Av HaTumah, and they themselves are Av HaTumah, and they in turn are metamed, meaning they impure those who they touch, to be also they can make people or kalim to become what's called a vlada tuma, which is a rishon latuma. So that's the first level. You have the avatuma that makes a rishon latuma. Now, food items that touch this rishon latuma, right? A rishon latuma, we said, is somebody who's come into contact with an avatuma. So this rishon latuma, right, can now make food that touch it. They can make it a sheni latuma. That is 1 degree away from a rishon latuma. Now, here is where it becomes a little bit more detailed, and that means as follows. With regards to regular food, which we're going to call chulin, which has no sanctity whatsoever, it's just called chulin, which means plain, right? Means profane or just non-consecrated is the best way to describe it. Non-consecrated food after sheni no longer passes on any degree of tumah to anything else. It itself, if it touches a sheni, the tumah does not become what we would call a shlishi l'tumah. When it comes to chulin, there's no such category as shlishi l'tumah. However, that's only with regards to chulin. That's only with regards to non-consecrated food. However, when we talked about other levels of consecrated food, such as truma or kodesh, right? Truma is the tithe that's taken, the 2% that's taken off for the kohen, which has a level of sanctity, and kodesh, which is something that has been consecrated as a sacrifice, for example, right, which is even a higher level of sanctity. If this truma, for example, touches a sheni, although we said by chulin nothing would happen, there would be no shlishi, but with truma we do say that there is a shlishi. There can be a 3rd degree of contracting tuma. However, with regards to truma, it doesn't go past shlishi, okay? Which means it becomes hustle, but which means becomes it's invalid. You cannot consume it, right? However, it does not pass on. It does not become revi'i, and it does not pass it on to anything else. Kodesh, on the other hand, if it touches the 3rd degree, which means it touches a shlishi. So let's review this for a second. You've got let's say a nida who sits on clothing, and somebody touches that clothing. That's a rishon l'tumah, right? And now that person, yes, touches something else. That becomes a sheni l'tumah, and that thing touches something else and becomes a shlishi l'tumah, and that thing touches something else. That's a revi'i l'tumah. So you understand, we're talking about a great distance already. When it comes to kodesh, we say it is that sensitive. It is that sensitive is the word, to be susceptible to tumah, that we go as far as to say up until the 4th degree from the rishon l'tumah, right, from the avatuma, it can become tummy. However, it doesn't go past revi. There's one more level, and that is for mechatas, which was the special purifying waters that were used by the para aduma. That we say it goes all the way to the 5th level, right? Chamishi. You can go to chamishi. It can still become tummy, right? So that is with regards to those different categories of tumah. It's important to remember these different levels and to remember the following. There's there are laws governing purity and impurity from the Torah, and then there are additional stringencies, which are what we would call fences, I suppose, to protect around the sanctity of the laws of Tumah Tahara, that the rabbis instituted even greater awareness to these laws by saying that even though the Torah doesn't mandate that you have to do certain things to be able to consume these foods. Nevertheless, they instituted that you would have to, for example, wash your hands, and in certain instances, even immerse into a mikveh, even though the Torah doesn't mandate that. Okay. Any questions so far?
I'm lost. Give me the reference page again.
Okay.
Where we're
Yes.
starting.
Okay, so we are starting really from Daf Chof Amud Beis. That's going to be the Mishnah of the third chapter. We're going to start again from the third chapter. However, what I did say is what I would like to do is just to go over the Mishnah very briefly on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, 18b. Do
18b.
that.
Okay.
18b. We're going to do that Mishnah briefly, and then we're going to jump straight into 20b, starting the third chapter again. My brief introduction was just to refresh everybody's memory about the different levels of Tumah and Tahara, and how far it goes, and to recognize that what we're discussing over here are the extra stringencies that the rabbis placed around consuming certain foods, depending on what level they are on, whether it's chulin or Ma'aser Sheni or Truma or Kodesh, etc., the different stringencies that they enacted for us to create a greater awareness around these laws. Okay, let's start from Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, top of the page. I'm in the article. If you are following it, the article is 18b2. Let's do it. Says the Heilige Mishnah, Noitlin liyodayim lechulin ulamaise uletruma. When it comes to this idea of washing our hands, now remember, the idea of hands becoming impure versus your entire body becoming impure is only rabbinic. There's no such concept in the Torah that a person becomes impure only with one part of his body. But because the rabbis wanted to create a greater awareness around these laws, they instituted this idea of washing your hands. So he says, we rinse your hands for chulin, right? So when we eat chulin bread, we still wash our hands, right? And we wash our hands for Maisa. This is referring to Ma'aser Sheni. This would be the after you tithe to the Levi, which came after the Truma. So after you've done that, there was another tithing that would be either taken up to Yerushalayim and consumed in Yerushalayim, or it would be given every third year, and every sixth year it would be given to the poor people. So this Ma'aser Sheni has a certain degree of sanctity beyond chulin. So he says, with regards to so this Ma'aser, you wash your hands, and for Truma you wash your hands. So it's putting those three categories together. Now, separating out the level of Kodesh, or the Kodesh, with regards to the food that has been consecrated, like the Karbanos. So for them, matbilin, it's not enough to wash your hands. You have to actually immerse your hands into a mikvah. Now, again, it's important to remember, we're not talking about when you know that you are impure. We're talking about when you think you are pure. You just have not been conscious constantly about where your hands have been and what they have touched. So although you are unaware that you have touched anything that would for sure make you tamei, because if you are aware of that, then you have to go to mikvah on a biblical level, right? But we're saying here, even if you have not come into contact with anything that you're aware of, nevertheless, you're going to wash your hands, or when it comes to Kodesh, you're going to immerse your hands. Again, this is rabbinic. Now, ulachatos, when it comes to handling the chatos water, then im nitmu yadav nitma gufoy. Once, if your hands became tamei, then your entire body is considered to be tamei, and you must immerse your entire body into the mikvah. Okay. Now, toval lechulin, huchzak lechulin. When a person decides to go into the mikvah to purify himself, to be able to eat chulin in a level of purity, if all you had in mind was to receive the level of sanctity that would permit you to eat chulin, then you can eat chulin, but also lemaisa. You're prohibited from consuming any maisa sheni. Now, tova lemaisa, huchsuk lemaisa. If you immerse, having in mind to get the sanctity for maisa sheni, then it's only good for maisa sheni, but also l'truma, you cannot eat truma. Tova l'truma, huchsuk l'truma. If you immersed yourself for truma, that's the only thing that truma will give you purity for, but not for a degree higher. Therefore, also l'kodesh, it's going to be prohibited for you to consume any kodesh. Tova l'kodesh, huchsuk l'kodesh. If you immerse yourself and had in mind only to purify yourself for kodesh, then also l'chatos, you cannot handle the chatos waters. Now, tova l'chamor mutar l'kal. If you immerse yourself for a greater stringency. So let's say, for example, you immersed yourself for Kodesh. So then you can consume anything that is beneath that level, like Truma or Maisa or Chulin. What happens if Taval v'loy huchzak? If a person immersed and he didn't have any intention. So we say it's ki'ilu loy taval, it's as if he did not immerse himself, because we're saying that there needs to be a level of an awareness in order to make you now permitted to consume any of these foods with any degree of tahara. Now, there's another law, and that is bigdei am haaretz midras leprushin. Now, let me just remind you what a midras is. A midras is basically when an avatuma has either stood or lay upon either a vessel or sat on a vessel or a garment. That garment now becomes a midras, and so therefore it is a rishon l'tuma, and it becomes a problem. With regards to an am haaretz, we consider that because they are not careful with these laws, it is possible that they sat on a garment that their wife sat on, or they put on a garment that their wife sat on while she was a nida, in which case it is a midras. It is a midras to a nida, to an avatuma, and that's a problem because you can therefore pass it on to the next level. So with regards to Perushim, and Perushim are the Pharisees, who they were the ones who were scrupulous to not even eat chulin, non-consecrated food, without being pure. So if they were impure, they would go and purify themselves. So we say, for them, any garment of an am haaretz, they have to treat it as a midras, and therefore, if they came into contact with it, they would have to go and they would have to purify themselves. So bigdei am haaretz midras leperushin. The clothing of an am haaretz is considered tamei through midras for perushim. Now, bigdei perushim midras la'ichle truma. This is a fascinating halacha, because we're saying, despite the fact that the perushim are very careful that the chulin that they eat should be done in a state of sanctity, nevertheless, their scrupulousness is not enough for those who want to eat truma, because since we say that truma has a higher sensitivity and is more capable to contract tuma, therefore, if you come into contact with the beged of even a guy who's careful usually to eat his food in a state of purity, nevertheless, those garments will now make you tamei through a midras of their clothing. Okay, bigdei oichle truma midras lakodesh. The clothing of those who eat truma is considered tamei through midras for those who eat kodesh. The same idea, because each one of these levels requires a greater sense of awareness and carefulness not to come into contact with anything even distant from the rishon l'tuma or an avatuma. Now, bigdei kodesh midras lachatos. Likewise, the clothing of those who eat kodesh is considered to be tamei through midrash for those who handle chatas waters. And here we have two instances illustrating this idea. Yosef ben Ye'ezer, who was one of the zugais. So Haya Chastid Shebekuhuna, he was the most devout kohen in the priesthood. V'Haya mitpachtoi midras lakodesh, but his this some kind of garment, it was a napkin or a head scarf, whatever it was considered to be tamei through midrash for those who ate kodesh. And here we're talking about somebody who's very careful. But nevertheless, the Chachamim made the decree that if somebody is careful with truma, it can still make something else tamei through midrash if they're going to be eating kodesh. Yochanan ben Gudgada, Yochanan ben Gudgada, what he would do is even his non-consecrated food, he would eat with this this sanctity of kodesh, which means he was that careful with regards to not coming into contact up to the level of revi l'tuma. Nevertheless, his cloth was still considered to be a midrash, a tamei through midrash for those who handle chatas waters. So that is this Mishnah, and hopefully it's a good chazara and refresher to remind us about these ideas of how far we go to foster a sense of awareness with regards to Tumah Tahara. Okay? Now, we're going to turn now to Daf Chof Amud Beis, and we're going to start the third chapter. Okay? With regards to Kodesh versus Truma, there are what's called different ma'alos, which are additional stringencies that the Chachamim instituted with regards to Kodesh that they didn't institute with regards to Truma. Okay, so let's start the Mishnah. Everybody have it? It's Daf Chof Amud Beis. 20b2. Okay. It says in the Mishnah, the stringency of Kodesh over Truma is as follows. We're going to list 10 or 11 different stringencies. There'll be a machlekes in the Gemara whether we consider them all or not. With regards to purifying a vessel that has contracted tumah. Okay, so what you can do is you can take the keli and you could put it into the mikvah, and thereby now making it fit to put truma in it, to put kodesh in it, and so on. However, with regards to putting one vessel into another vessel, there's a difference between whether you are intending to use this vessel for truma or for kodesh. Now, it's important to understand as follows. When regards to mikvah, there are laws of chatzitza, which are interpositions, which means to say, if, for example, I have a Band-Aid on my hand and I want to go to the mikvah, that Band-Aid, if it's stuck to my hand, will serve as an interposition between myself and the water. And because of that, my tevilah is not going, my immersion is not going to be a valid immersion. Why? Because I have something that is preventing the water from getting to my entire body. So likewise, this is true with regards to vessels. That's why you'll see people who want to go and immerse vessels in a mikveh, they make sure to take the labels off the pot, because if the label is still on, then the water's not getting everywhere. So people will go to great lengths to try and get the stickers or the labels off the pot. But here we're not talking about something that is that stuck on. What we're saying is that if you have one vessel inside of another vessel, a bigger vessel, and it's not really stuck to one to another, right? The one inside can still float. So we say with regards to truma, we're not going to make an addition additional stringency and say you can't even put one vessel into the other vessel because we're afraid that maybe one vessel will be heavy and push down on the other vessel, and therefore the water won't go everywhere. We don't say that by truma. Why? Because these vessels, we're talking about vessels that are loose, one inside the other. But when it comes to kodesh, we say that's not going to be accepted. That even though it's a far suspicion, but because we're talking about a higher level, we're talking about kodesh, we will not allow you to immerse one vessel inside of another vessel. Now, there's going to be a discussion in the Gemara as to what the reason for that is, whether it's for chatzitza or maybe another reason. But right now, for now, we'll just present it as for the issue of chatzitza. Okay, the next thing is achorayim v'toich ubeis hatzvita bitruma. When it comes to a vessel becoming impure, usually when it comes to a biblical impurity, right? We say there's just one vessel. That's it. There's no different parts to the vessel. One part of the vessel becomes impure. The rest of the vessel becomes impure. There's no inside, outside, handle, and so on with regards to biblical. But when you are immersing a vessel, in order to satisfy a rabbinic requirement, to have extra sanctity so that you can, for example, use it for truma. So we say if the outside or the inside or the handle of a vessel were the only thing that contracted this question about truma, so with regards to truma, all you need to do is to immerse that part of the vessel. However, not with regards to kodesh. If you're going to be using this vessel for kodesh, then we say that even if just the handle contracted a rabbinic level of tuma, nevertheless, you're going to have to, when it comes to kodesh, immerse the entire thing. The next level is hanoise es hamidras, someone who is carrying a midras. So what did we say a midras was? It's something that was stood upon or sat upon by someone who's a rishon, an avatuma. So let's say, for example, if you're going to take the shoe of a zav, right? The shoe of a zav is something that the zav stood upon, and so now it's a midras l'tuma. So it is both impure and it makes the person holding it impure. Nevertheless, we say that noises hatruma, this person, while he's holding this shoe, can still carry truma on his shoulder, or he can carry, in general, he can carry it. What are we talking about over here? Well, if you have an earthenware barrel, for example, so the earthenware barrel does not become tamei on the inside if somebody touches it on the outside, because there's a special law with an earthenware vessel that it only becomes tamei if something comes into the, I don't know how to call it, the airspace of it on the inside, right? But if you touch it from the outside, it doesn't become tamei. So here you have a scenario where a guy is, on the one hand, walking down the street, holding in his hand a shoe, right, which is a midras, which is tamei. And on the other hand, he is carrying a barrel of truma, and we say that because the barrel's closed, right? So therefore, we're not concerned of a far-fetched scenario where somehow the truma would become invalid. However, we won't say that with regards to kodesh. Avaloi es kodesh. He cannot carry kodesh, even though it's a far-fetched suspicion. And we'll see later on, it's because of a particular incident that took place. Therefore, they made a particular takana only with regards to kodesh, because that's where it happened. But we don't. But we won't stretch that stringency and apply it to truma as well. The next level, the next stringency of kodesh over truma is big day oichle truma. Midras l'kodesh. We say that the garments of those who eat truma are considered to be midras for those who eat kodesh. We already mentioned this in the previous Mishnah. And then we continue with a few more. We say, loike midas hakodesh midas hatruma. The rule of kodesh is not like the rule of truma with regards to chatzitza. So we'll explain what that means right now. Sheba Kodesh, when it comes to Kodesh, here's an interesting rule. You won't find anybody today taking their jacket or their skirt and immersing it into a mikvah. However, in temple times, they did. Okay, and when Mashiach comes, we will. When you'll take clothes that have contracted tumah and you will immerse them into a mikvah, right? However, just like we spoke about a chatzitza on the body, you can have a chatzitza on the beged. Now, what would a chatzitza be? An interposition? It would be something that is preventing the water from getting everywhere. So, if, for example, I had certain strings or belts or whatever it might be, if I tie a knot in them, right? Obviously, if it's a very tight knot, the water is not going to be able to get to them. However, here we're speaking about where you have a very loose knot, right? You have something tied in a very loose way where all the water can come in and touch every part of the garment. However, there's still a concern that maybe when the garment immerses into the water, it might inflate a little bit and therefore make the knot a little bit tighter and possibly prevent water from getting in everywhere. So when it comes to Kodesh, we say what you have to do is you need to undo any knots, even loose knots. You've got to undo them completely. Umenagev, and you have to dry it from any dampness or any wetness, because any even water could serve as a chatzitza. If it's not pure water, then the water can be sitting on the garment, not letting the pure water touch it. So you've got to dry it. That's why you'll find many times when people are washing their hands, those who are extra careful will make sure that they spend a few seconds at least to take the towel and dry their hands so that it should be completely dry before they wash it, because they don't want the water to serve as a chatzitza. So here's the same thing, that you have to release the knots and you have to dry the garment properly, so that omatbil, and then you immerse it, and then afterwards you can retie the knots on this garment. But with regards to truma, when we say about truma, here we don't apply that stringency, and we say not only do you not need to undo the knot, but you could even, in the first instance, tie a knot loose. We're talking about loose knots, right? You can tie a loose knot and then immerse the garment, and it's no problem. Now, another stringency with regards to kodesh over truma, and that is kelim hanigmorim b'tahara, vessels that were completed in a state of tahara. A vessel cannot contract tumah if it is not yet finished. It's not a finished product. So long as it is an unfinished product, it doesn't matter how much tumah touches it, it does not contract tumah, because it's not considered susceptible to tumah, because it's not considered of any value, because it hasn't yet been made into this vessel. So now, with regards to somebody who is making this vessel, and he's now getting to the end of completing this vessel, and he makes sure that from this point on, he is in a state of purity. So we say with regards to Kodesh, tzrichim tvila l'Kodesh. You still need to take the vessel and immerse it into Kodesh. But avalei l'truma, we don't say this with regards to truma. So long as the person was careful from the time that he's going to complete making it, we don't require you to take that vessel and immerse it into the mikvah if you're just going to be using that for truma. The next one, hakli mitzaref masha b'toiche lakodesh. A vessel combines what is in it with regards to kodesh. What does that mean? That means it's like this. If you remember, at the beginning, we spoke about the different levels of Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, Revi, right? The different levels or degrees that separate between you and the original Tumah. So now, if, for example, we say food, right, can become a Sheni L'Tumah. So let's say it becomes a Sheni L'Tumah, and it's on a plate. And on that plate, there are other pieces of meat, let's say, for example. So with regards to truma, right? We won't say that the plate combines all of them, and therefore they're all considered to become tamei. Only the actual piece that came into contact with tuma, that will be tamei. However, with regards to kodesh, we say the plate itself, the vessel itself, combines all of those things together, and even though only one piece contracted tuma by coming into contact with it, nevertheless, it will expand and it will spread to all the other pieces. Okay, so that's what that means. That the vessel combines everything that's in it with regards to kodesh to contract tuma, but that's not to contract tuma. However, that's not true with regards to truma. The next level, the next stringency is haravi bakodesh pasol. We say that with regards to kodesh, we go even to a ravi, but with regards to truma, v'hashlishi betruma, it's only shlishi that is unfit in the case of truma. Uba truma, and with regards to truma, we say as follows: Im nitmeis achas miyadav. If a person contracted tuma, contracted tuma, a rabbinic tuma, in one of his hands, chaverta tahira, the other hand remains tahar, which means he only has to go and purify one of his hands, not the other of his hands. Uba kodesh, but with regards to kodesh, once one of your hands become tamei, even the rabbanon, matbil shteyan, you have to immerse both of them. Why? Because the principle is, the rule is that a hand makes the other hand tamei with regards for kodesh, but not with regards to truma. The next stringency, we say that oichalim nuguvim biyodayim musavois betruma. You can eat dry foods with contaminated hands in the case of truma. Why? Because there's a principle that food does not contract or does not contract tuma unless it has been prepared to be susceptible to tuma. And how's that done? That's by having one of the 7 liquids come and wash this food. There are seven different fluids. There's water, you have dew, you have blood, oil, milk, honey, and wine. Those 7 types of liquids, once they prepare the food to become tuma, then if you touch this truma with hands which are tamei, they make the food tamei. But before they've come into contact with any of these liquids, so we say that even if your hands are tamei, you can still eat this truma if they have not been prepared to become tamei. However, we say that there's an extra stringency by kodesh, avolei by kodesh. That's not the case with kodesh, because we say by kodesh that because it is so cherished, because it is so holy, that itself makes it prepared to receive, to contract tuma. Okay, the final stringency, and that is, we turn over to Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, ha'oinen or mechusa kippurim, an oinen. This is when a person has one of his very close relatives that passed away, and the first day he is an oinen, right? So now he is not allowed to partake in any of the sacrificial food, as we read in Pasha Shmini, right? Until till nightfall of that day. So with regards to him, and also with regards to Mechusa Kippurim means someone who, although they've already gone to the mikvah, and although they may have had what's called the Har of Shemesh, the day has passed, nevertheless, until they bring the special carbon, like the Mitzvah would have to bring a carbon, or someone else, so they're not allowed to partake in the sacrificial food until they brought this korban. So in both of these cases, we're talking about someone who, during a period of time, although he may not be impure, but nevertheless, he is restricted from eating kodesh. We say that tzrichin tvila lekodesh, he will require immersion for kodesh, avaloi letruma, but not for truma, which means to say, although he's not aware that he's come into contact with anything that would make him tamei, nevertheless, because kodesh is so stringent, right? Because it's so susceptible to tumah, we therefore say that there was a period of time that you were restricted from eating kodesh, so we don't believe that you were aware and conscious enough to make sure to stay away from any kind of tumah that would invalidate you, and therefore you need to go and immerse. But with regards to truma, we don't go that far, and we say so long as you are still in a state of purity and you know that you haven't come into contact with any thing that would make you tamei, then you don't have to go and immerse yourself, even though you were an oinen. And even though you were a mechusa kippurim, we won't add that stringency. So that's the Mishnah. Any questions before we go to the Gemara?
Yes, what happens about, is it touching a dead animal the same as a person if they're getting terma?
So that's, we say in the end of Pasha Shmini, we say that if you touch a nevela, if you touch a dead animal, then you do become tamei. Yes, you do become tamei. You become a
what happens with slaughtering then? Because the animal's dead when you slaughter it. It's
so we say that a carcass that has been shechted properly, to the best of my knowledge, does not impart tumah. I want to say that I want to look that up again and check, because I don't want to say something for sure until I know for sure. But I think it's only with regards to an avela, that a non-kosher animal that is a dead carcass. If you touch it, you become tamei. I'm not sure that applies to a animal that was shechted properly. I don't.
Why wouldn't it? If it's been shechted properly, that it should have then the hechsher for being appropriate to do.
Right, but so therefore it wouldn't pass any tumah to anybody. I mean,
Right.
if you think about it, you'd have koyanim going to mikvah all day, every day, if they're bringing karbanos, right? And they shechted it, and then they become tamei because now the animal was dead, and then they'd have to go between each sacrifice. You'd never be able to get anything done in the Beis Hamikdash.
Right,
So
right.
I'm pretty sure that it doesn't pass on.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Anything else before we move on to the Gemara? Okay.
Rabbi,
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Earthenware is what is it basically, the clay of the ground that makes the earthenware, or what is it that it consists of?
It's called a kli cheres. It's an earthenware vessel. So that's what it is. It's an earthenware vessel. And it has a special law. And the law is that it does not become tamei when something touches it on the outside, only when something goes into the space on the inside.
But what is it made from? I'm just curious. Is it made
Earthenware, as it implies, is from the earth.
from the earth? Okay, that's
Yeah. It's a clay. It's a clay.
It's a kind, yeah.
I see.
Okay. So now the first thing we said in the Mishnah was that you can immerse one vessel within another vessel for the purpose of truma, but not for kodesh. So the Gemara wants to know, bakodesh, my taima loy. Why can you not do it for kodesh, even though you can do it for truma? What would be the problem? Okay. Amar Rabbi Ilah says the reason why by kodesh you can't do it is because because the weight of this vessel is going to create an interposition between the water and the keli. So therefore, that's what we're concerned about. And this is the reason why the Mishnah tells us that you can't do it. So now the Gemara immediately asks that it seems based on what Rabbi Levi is saying, that there are two cases in our Mishnah then that have a stringency based on chatzitza. So why would I need to mention two cases of chatzitza? One case of chatzitza would be enough. From the Gemara, from the fact that the latter section of the Mishnah does not allow the immersion that is going to have any kind of chatzitza, like for example when we talk about the tying of the knots and the untying. So reisha lav mishum chatzitza. We should infer from this that the first section of the Mishnah is not about chatzitza. The Ketani Sefer, because we learned in the end of the Mishnah, that the rule of Kodesh is not the same as the rule of Truma. Sheba Kodesh, Mate, or Nagev, or Matbil, because in regards to Kodesh, you have to untie the knots. And dry it, and then immerse the garment, and then retire the knots. But in the case of Truma, he can tie the knots loosely and then immerse them in. And we see, so there it talks about the laws of chatzitza and the concern that we have about chatzitza. So clearly, the beginning of the Mishnah shouldn't be concerned about the chatzitza, but rather it must be another reason for why we don't allow putting one vessel inside the other the vessel. And for the Gemara, no. Reisha v'seifa mishum chatzitza. The truth is that the beginning of the Mishnah, the first case that we mentioned, the vessel inside a vessel, and the end of the Mishnah, which talks about tying the knots, they're both concerned about chatzitza, utzricha, and I need to have both of them. The Tana needed to teach us both cases. Why? If I would have only taught you the first case, which talks about putting one vessel inside another vessel, Havamina, then I would have said that what? Hainu taima de la kodesh loi. That the reason a vessel cannot be immersed in another vessel for kodesh is mishum kvedai shal kli deika, because of the weight of the inner vessel that exists. But Aval Seifa, with regards to the end of the Mishnah, which the case is slightly different. It's not the same, because the Lekik Veda Shel Keli, you don't have something else pressing against the garment, like you have in the case of one vessel pushing against the other. So Ema, maybe I will say l'kodesh nami lehav chatzitza. Then maybe I would say that this loose knot does not constitute an interposition, because it's different to than one vessel being inside of another vessel where you have yes, that you have one external factor pushing against it. And had I left out the first case and only taught the last case, which means to say I wouldn't have mentioned one vessel inside of another vessel, I would only taught about loosening the knots. Then I would have said, here, the reason why I cannot immerse this garment for Kodesh is Mishum, is because the Kitra B'maya Ahaduke Mahadak, and not becomes tighter inside the water. What does that mean? Because the water can inflate it a little bit, so then something that was prior loose now becomes tighter. Avul Reisha, but in the case of one vessel inside of another vessel, here we won't have that problem with the water, because the Maya Akfuye Makfule Lemana, since the water causes the vessel in a way to float. So, lehava chatzitza, I would have thought, if the Mishnah didn't mention, I would say that it doesn't become a chatzitza. That's why we need to have both cases, because they're slightly different. Although the concern is the same, chatzitza, but nevertheless, the factors are different, and that's why the Tana taught us both cases. Now, the Gemara comments and says that Rabbi Ilah has explained his position on this Mishnah based on his opinion that's stated elsewhere. The Omar, Rabbi Ilah, the Omar Rabbi Ilah, Omar Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa, Rabbi Ilah says in the name of Rabbi Papa, Esem Mailus Shanukan. In this Mishnah, there are 10 different heightened standards that were decreed for Kodesh, but not for Truma. The first 5, Bein bein lakodesh, bein lechulin shenar tarza kodesh, both to kodesh and to chulin that were prepared to the tahara standard of kodesh, which means to say that there are the things that are rabbinically mandated to be on the level of purity of kodesh, and then there are additional stringencies, these same stringencies that a person personally takes on for himself, a chumrah that he takes on for himself, that although the rabbis don't require it, but he says, even non-consecrated food, I'm going to keep these levels of stringency. So we say the first 5, we say apply equally, right? That the stringencies that we apply to kodesh also apply to the chulin, the non-consecrated food that were made with this intention of them being on the level of the sanctity of kodesh. But achronis, the last 5 cases, la kodesh, they only apply to kodesh. We will not extend that and say that these extra stringencies should be applied to the person who wants to take on this extra stringency when he's eating non-consecrated food and has these scenarios to deal with. So the Gemara asks, my timer, what's the reason that the first 5 apply to even non-consecrated and the last 5 do not? So he says, because chamish kamaisa, the first 5 stringencies, the islahu drara de tuma midaraisa, which involve the concern of a truma, a concern of tuma according to a biblical law, because through a far stretched concern, it could come to a biblical type of tuma. The rabbis decreed that these extra stringencies should be adhered to both by the person who is preparing it for kodesh and the person who has this chulin that he's trying to prepare on the level of kodesh. But basraisa, but the last 5 cases, the less lehu drara de tuma midiraisa, which do not involve the concern of any tuma according to biblical law, then we say that the rabbis only made a decree with regards to kodesh, but they didn't extend this to include the non-consecrated food that a person was trying to keep and prepare according to the Torah standard of kodesh. So therefore, the rabbis did not decree. So therefore, it makes sense to Rabbi Law that these 2 cases of chatzitza are included because they're not exactly the same. When it comes to putting one vessel inside of another vessel, if they were to press against each other, right, then on a biblical level, it would become a problem because the tefillah wouldn't be a good tefillah, right? Whereas the loose knot on a biblical level, that would never be a problem. Okay, so now says the Gemara that that's all fine with regards to the Rebbe law and the way he wants to interpret it. He wants to interpret that the reason why by kodesh you cannot put one vessel in another vessel is because of the concern that it might be an interposition. Rava has a different opinion. Rava says midaseifa have mishum chasisa, from that which in the latter section of the Mishnah, we say that you cannot have this loose knot because of a chatzitza. So therefore, I say that Reisha Lav Mishum Chatzitza, the first section, is not dealing with the issue of a chatzitza, of an interposition. V'Reisha Haina Taima, but the reason for the first cases in our Mishnah, the reason for not allowing one vessel to go into another vessel. With regards to kodesh, we say is gezerah. This is a special decree that one should not immerse needles and spinning hooks, which are very small, bekli, in a vessel she'ein befiv kishveferes hanoid, within a vessel whose opening is not at least as the size of a skin bottle's tube, right? They had this type of spout that they would pour things into this skin bottle, right? And we say, with regards to the laws of mikvahs, if you want to immerse in a mikvah that is not pure rainwater or something else that is kosher for a mikvah, but you want to go into mayim she'uvin, water that is not valid for use of a mikvah, you're able to do that so long as the body of water that you're immersing into is directly connected to another body of water that is kosher for a mikvah. But how big does the channel that connects the two have to be in order to consider it connected? It has to be at least the size of the opening of a skin's bottle tube, right? That spout, which we say is the size of 2 fingers, that they should be able to enter it and turn around, to turn completely around. That's the size that it has to be. So now, what Rav is suggesting is that if I allow any type of immersing one vessel in another vessel, you might come to take small needles and small spinning hooks that you want to immerse to be able to use for Kodesh, and you might put it into a vessel that has a very small opening because you don't want it to, come out immediately. So you put it into something that has a very small opening. But the problem is that this new vessel becomes its own, so to speak, mikvah, right? And the only way it would be valid is if the opening of this bottle, the opening of this container, had an opening big enough to allow it to be connected in a legitimate way to the main mikvah. Now, if it's less than that size, then what's going to happen is these needles and these spinning hooks are not going to be considered to be properly immersed. Therefore, says Rava, that's why we go a step further and we make like a fence around it, and we say, don't put any vessel inside another vessel if you're going to be using it for Kodesh. Tiditznan, as we learned we learned in a Mishnah with regards to connecting mikvahs, eruv mikvahs kishveferes anoid. The mingling of mikvahs is accomplished through the connection of the size of a skin bottle's tube, the size of its thickness, and the size of its hole. And what is that? It's a space that is measured with 2 fingers that can rotate inside of it. Okay, so that's Rava's opinion, and I think I'll stop here for today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to, or any comments, I'm happy to answer them. And then we will continue Be'ezus Hashem tomorrow from Daf of Beis Amud Aleph, where we're holding. Any questions or any comments? Okay, so I want to wish you all a wonderful day. And it's nice to be back and to be learning again with you. And Hashem should help that we should be Zoicha very soon to have practical applications for all these laws with the building of the Beis Hamikdash from Herav Yameinu.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yashikah.